Welcome to today's webinar, Guidelines for Unified IT, Better Visibility of IT Across Physical and Virtual Platforms, brought to you by Uptime and Ziff Davis. This is Michael Oliver Goodwin speaking, and I'll be your moderator today. We have a few instructional notes and announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You can ask questions at any time by typing your query into the Question tab at the bottom of the screen and pressing the Send button. We'll do our best to answer those questions at the conclusion of the presentation today. If you'd like to watch this presentation again or share it with your colleagues, it'll be available in approximately 24 hours. We will send all registrants an email as soon as the webinar is available for on-demand viewing. Finally, if you'd like to tweet during this event, please use the Twitter tab on your screen at Uptime Software. All right, let's get started. Our speaker today is David Leaf, IT Systems Management Guru at Uptime Software. David comes to the table with 15 years of management experience in technology, client services, and military environments. In 9 years with Uptime Software, he's worked closely with hundreds of users in data centers around the world. David, we're delighted to have you with us today. Please take the controls.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone for attending today. Today, of course, I'm going to be talking about how to move yourself towards a unified monitoring framework that will cover your virtual, physical, cloud, network, and application servers. So I'm sure you're all aware that unified monitoring right now is a very common theme. So you're seeing a lot of webinars about it, a lot of mentions in different conferences and online articles. And it's something that within the data center is starting to get a lot more traction, a lot more visibility for a few reasons. So I spend a great deal of my time talking to our users about what unified monitoring actually is and what the benefits are of having a unified platform in your data center. So I'd like to start off with being very clear around how we define unified monitoring. So when I talk to users about unified monitoring, I'm talking very specifically about application availability, performance capacity information across those virtual physical cloud platforms, as well as your applications and network, and being able to, from a single view, one product, one installable, see that information about all of your critical business services. So when I talk to users, generally they fit into one of three different buckets in terms of their maturity and evolution on the unified monitoring journey. Very, very commonly we'll find that either users have no monitoring in place for their environment at all, which clearly is a very scary proposition or position to be in, and I'll talk more about the reasons for that in a few moments. Most typically is that users will fall into what we call the tool soup scenario, where they'll have a collection of individual point tools monitoring different components of their environment. So you may have a niche tool or a specific tool for your virtualization platform, another one for your networks, another one for your applications, or maybe it's even further divided around technology platforms, so maybe a Unix monitoring tool and then a Linux monitoring tool beside that. So it's very common for large data centers to be in that environment, and it becomes very, very inefficient. The third bucket that users fall into is that fully unified monitoring bucket, where they're able to see from a single console the status of all of their business services and quickly drill down into any problems that may be going on in the environment. So let's talk more about that tool soup and some of the common pitfalls and challenges that I'm sure you're all aware of in dealing with this type of situation. The first thing that users report that they run into is a number of integration headaches, so simply getting different tools in the data center to talk to each other about the status of their services. So simple examples would be viewing the status of your network and your application all in one dashboard, or passing ticket or outage information between different tools. Maybe there's a centralized ticketing system that is rolling up data from a number of different places. It'd be very, very difficult in that tool soup scenario to roll all that information together. Another common pitfall is around differing metrics. So niche tools, point tools, always have very, very deep metrics in their specific areas of expertise, but those deep, deep metrics don't always add a lot of value to the higher level story of simply, are my applications available and performing well? Inaccurate reports is another big challenge. So I've worked with a number of directors of IT, VP level executives who have a very, very hard problem with siloed tools, because once a month, really all they are looking for is a single report that says, what is the health of my environment? Where are the problem areas? What do I need to go focus on? But that can be a very, very complicated answer to get when you're trying to pull that data from different reports across different systems and view it all in a consistent way. Of course, there's also increased costs that go along with tool soup. So mean time to repair and triaging of issues can suffer significantly when you can't get a clear picture of where the failure in a complex application that spans many silos, where that failure is actually originating from. And then, of course, the last one, which no one really wants to say, is political issues. It's very, very easy when using different tools to end up finger-pointing between different departments and between different technology silos. So the network team is convinced it is their fault. The database team is convinced it isn't their fault. The virtualization team isn't taking claim. And at the end of the day, what that means is that each department is probably okay because they validated that the outage isn't their fault. But actually restoring that service and getting the end user experience of that application to be restored can become a very, very long-winded, deep conversation and problem set versus being something that can instantly be resolved. Now, why is unified monitoring so important? So obviously a lot of those challenges that I just talked about are very important on their own, but I'd like to run through a few very specific numbers from the reports that were done recently to help emphasize the nature of this problem and why a unified platform is so important. So the first number is that really all monitoring is about ensuring that your service delivery is enterprise grade and top class. Gartner has estimated that a conservative estimate for the cost of downtime is $42,000 per hour. So every minute that a business-critical application is down, be it a revenue-generating application or just an internal processing application, there's a real significant cost to that outage. And every minute counts. So if you cannot recover your application quickly, it's just dollars and cents pulled away either through staffing inefficiency, people needing to go work on a problem, end users, maybe sales reps or whoever who can't gain access to the business service. It all adds up very, very quickly in a way that is far more substantial, at least monetarily, than most organizations actually realize. So a few other numbers here to back up some of the things I talked about in the last slide. 41% of organizations are using 10 or more products to manage their IT performance. That's an incredible number of tools to simply get an answer to how is my data center performing, what's the user experience and service availability of my critical applications. So you can imagine trying to just figure out what's going on with 10 tools telling you potentially different versions of what's happening. It'd be very, very complicated when it just doesn't have to be. Also, only 16% of organizations are able to proactively prevent any type of performance issue. So we've got over 80% of users here who simply cannot get ahead of the curve, cannot become proactive about managing their own performance. They basically are sitting in the back seat waiting for a problem to happen and then triaging the issue afterwards. Also, 63% of organizations reported the inability to correlate data collected from different sources. So if we're looking at 10 different tools to manage performance, over half of the organizations found that it was very, very difficult to look at all those different tools and simply figure out how they related to each other, determine where different gaps in the process were so they can actually focus on what matters, which is resolving problems and improving service delivery. Now, on the more positive side, organizations that have end-to-end application visibility into application performance are 89% more likely to prevent incidents before users notice. So that ability to see the entire application stack, the entire service stack from one view gives you an incredible amount of value and the ability to actually proactively prevent outages before they impact the end user, which if we get back to $42,000 per hour for the cost of an outage is immeasurable in terms of both satisfaction of IT service delivery, but also monetarily speaking. So what you should be looking for in this unified tool is a single tool that helps resolve all of those problems. You're looking for something that will provide you with a single unified IT dashboard that allows you to monitor, alert, and report on availability, performance, and capacity across all of your applications and IT services, all of your network devices, all of your virtual servers, physical servers, and cloud servers, all from a single interface. And what does that interface look like? Well, the reality is there's a lot of different shapes and sizes of interfaces. But you want to look for a tool that gives you flexibility to present availability information in a way that makes sense to you. So I think we're going to stop now for our first poll. All right, I think that that survey is just going out now, and I want to take a moment to take a look at some of the results. So the question is, what state are you currently in? So the three buckets that I mentioned earlier in the presentation in terms of your path towards unified monitoring. Are you in a situation where you have no monitoring in place, where you have a collection of different tools, or in a place where you have a single unified view? And we can see from the results that about 60% of the people in attendance are in that middle bucket, which is the tool soup, which clearly is a pretty normal situation, right? So don't feel bad about where you're at. Clearly, this presentation will have some value for you in helping you get to that level of unified monitoring. And we're starting to see that the unified monitoring number as well as the no monitoring number are actually pretty even. All right, so I'd like to move on to the next slide here. So let's talk a little bit after those results about how you get to that next level. Right? So if you are in that monitoring tool soup scenario, what should you really be looking for at a more granular level in a tool to provide unified monitoring? And how do you actually get from A to B? How do you look at your collection of individual tools? How do you determine what the important things are to move forward? Which tools can you consolidate and roll up into a single view? How do you convince management that this is an important thing to work with? So let's talk a little bit about finding that right tool to start with. And the first thing that you want to keep in mind is business service level views. So I touched on this a little bit already. You want to look for a tool that has flexible dashboards, of course, so something that will display the availability and performance and capacity of your environment in a way that makes sense to you. However, what you also want to look for is something that we call global and local views. So one of the pitfalls of many dashboards and monitoring tools today is that the dashboards are very focused on the IT administration staff and the systems administrators and the technical staff who are providing these IT services. But if you can get to that stage, you're doing pretty well. But the real value of these dashboards is the ability to communicate to the consumers of these IT services how your service delivery is actually functioning. So you want to look for a dashboarding tool that will allow you to display dashboards for yourself, more granular so you understand technically what's going on, but also that can be displayed to the end users, the consumers, to give them an idea about availability information in the environment. What you also want to be able to do is be able to pull different application availability metrics from different parts of the environment into a single view. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in a moment. The next piece that you want to look at is the depth of metrics. And the first thing you want to keep in mind about the depth of metrics is that you need to find the right balance of very, very in-depth metrics that you get out of traditional point tools versus finding higher level metrics that are available across a variety of different tools. Right, so traditionally how I like to think about the right balance and depth of metrics is that most of these point tools will provide the detailed granular metrics that can be needed for true low-level diagnostics of application availability, so very, very deep metrics. However, when you try to tie those metrics back to actual service delivery metrics, so things like the user experience, so how is the performance for the end user? How are the different components of each application actually functioning? Individual servers in the chain, are they oversaturated? You'll find that those numbers provide much more value in demonstrating the overall availability and health of your business services, as opposed to those truly deep, granular metrics that they certainly have their value if you're doing that deep root cause or performance analysis. But you want to try to bring yourself slightly higher level to focus more on those delivery type metrics. You also want to look for a tool that can accurately understand the difference between virtual and physical metrics. So of course every VM, as an example, will have the idea of its own CPU usage and raw megahertz from the outside world. So VMware Virtual Center will show you what the CPU usage for a VM actually is. However, you also want to be aware of the internals of that VM. What does that VM think going on with performance? So for example, the VM itself internally may think that its CPU is capped at 100%, which will cause paging and all kinds of performance degradation problems in the VM. But from the virtual level, it may look like that VM is only using 10 megahertz of total capacity. So you want to find a tool that will give you that internal and external view on virtualization to really understand some of the nuances of performance for those applications. And of course, you're looking for a tool that will provide you insight into the user experience and application performance side of what's going on in your environment. The third thing that you'll want to look for is availability monitoring. So across technologies and teams, we already talked about covering each of the silos. You want to look for a tool that can pull each of the individual pieces of a complex application into one view of availability, so that business service view. So I'll give you a very direct example. So it would be common for, say, a website to have its front-end servers hosted on one technology, middle-tier servers hosted on another. Maybe it's a Linux platform, and then maybe it's database applications hosted on another platform. Maybe it's a big data IBM Power platform. With the individual silo and niche tools, there's no way to get a simple view of availability across all those components. So what you want to look for in a unified tool is something that can take aspects from each of those three environments, understand how each of those components relate to each other, and translate those into a single high-level status of, is the application up or not? And if it's not up, which of those components that's actually making up that application is down and needs to go be looked at. Now, the last thing that you really want to focus on in a unified tool is all about capacity management. Now, capacity management is an interesting one because it's often viewed as a problem that's just too complicated for most environments, or it's a problem that you need to go out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on in tooling to simply understand what's going on. But the reality for most organizations and most data centers is they'll get 80% of the value out of capacity planning by simply being able to answer three questions. And those three questions are, what do I have, what am I using, and when will I run out? So if you can understand what your total capacity is, how much of that you're using and how it's trending and when you're going to run out, you will be in a better position overall than many organizations out there and have the opportunity to get ahead of the curve and plan for future capacity in a way that's accurate enough to address 90% of all the issues that you could run into capacity-wise. Another important piece to look for is what I call the apples-to-apples approach. So in my scenario I mentioned a few minutes ago, you'll be looking at capacity potentially across multiple different architectures. So you could have an Intel architecture, maybe a Spark architecture, maybe it's a cloud resource that you don't really know what the architecture is, maybe it's a power resource. If you want to do real capacity management, you need to be able to compare capacity across all of those different architectures in a way that is consistent. All right, so an apples to apples. All right, so being able to look at that power machine versus a Spark machine and understand what the total throughput of those different servers are, how they relate to each other, and really clearly identify when each of them will run out. So those are some key things that you want to look for technically in a tool. And if you can put together those 4 things in a unified way from a single tool, you will be much further ahead than you are today using a collection of different tools. Now let's talk a little bit about migration tips. So back to some of those earlier challenges. One of the ones I mentioned that you'll find with silo tools is the problem of trust and political aspects of unified monitoring. So one of the key steps for making this migration is all about building trust in the new tooling so that all of the different teams are on the same page and believe that the value of the tool is there and that tool is providing a single view of the truth across the entire environment. So let's talk about 3 things that can help build trust. The first is that if you roll out new tooling, you should absolutely be doing concurrent monitoring. So you'll want to roll out the unified option alongside your existing operations and your existing monitoring and give it a little bit of overlap, a time when you can look at both tools, validate the numbers against each other, validate that both are alerting or reporting in the correct way. And that will allow you to demonstrate accuracy and build more trust across the other teams using each of their individual siloed pieces. It also gives you an opportunity to start proving efficiency and improvements in service delivery of those critical applications. So by having the two tools beside each other, one unified view, you can look at your service delivery and validate that new tooling is actually having a concrete impact on your key business metrics, such as mean time to repair, overall SLA availability, and application user experience. Now, another common problem that we hear from people when trying to migrate from siloed tools to a unified tool is, what's the ramp-up time? What's the time to value on these types of tools? So there's a few things that you'll want to look for in this new tool. Right, you'll be looking for something where you can easily import any scripts or custom application monitors that you may have into the new tooling. You'll also be looking for something that can import any custom configurations, right? So some sort of batch file or auto-discovery process that will allow you to suck in most of the settings that you have already into that single tooling. And then also set up overhead. So auto-discovery is essential, as well as monitoring templates across different types of technologies. If you can find a tool with these types of capabilities, it becomes much quicker to set those things up, go through building out that trust with the new tooling, and adopt those new tools. So I've provided a little bit of info and oversight about unified monitoring in general, what some of the key challenges are. What I'd like to do before I wrap up is do another quick poll. So I'll pass this back to the moderator to do the poll, and please take a moment to submit your questions. Let's pause for a moment. So the question is, are you able, regardless of where you are in your monitoring life cycle, are you able to see the overall health of your critical applications across all of those IT silos, either through your existing monitoring tools or some other portals or dashboards in your environment?
While people are looking at the poll, we should also remind them that this is an opportunity to submit any questions they may have by using the question tab on the screen. And we'll get to that during the Q&A.
So we'll just wait a few seconds for more input here. All right, so we can see that we have about 32% of respondents who are able to see that single view of application health, and about 66% who aren't. That mirrors pretty closely some of the numbers in our first poll. So it's a nice validation of where you are individually in terms of your monitoring life cycle. So I'd like to go back to Q&A for a moment. All right, so while we kind of look through the questions, please take a moment to submit your questions. I'd also like to remind everybody that there are a number of different resource links available while this Q&A slide is up. So if you'd like to visit our website, please do so. If you'd like to register for an evaluation or contact our sales team, please feel free to do so as well.
So David, do you think we should start with the Q&A then?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
All right, great. Well, this first question is a primal question. It's the one I always want to ask myself. How much does the uptime solution cost?
That's a great question, right? So the pricing for uptime right now is starting price of $99 per server platform that you're monitoring, with, of course, volume discounts available as well. And when you compare that to the overall value that a unified tool like uptime can bring to the table and helping to address some of those issues around outages and the cost of downtime, it's certainly a worthwhile investment.
Very good. Okay, here's another excellent question. We have different teams for each silo, each using their own tool. How do I open a unified monitoring discussion with my manager?
That's also a great question. So how I would start that conversation, and I do work with a lot of system administrators and architects who are trying to start this conversation. Probably the best way to start the conversation is to come back to some of those numbers that I shared earlier in the presentation around the costs of downtime, and more importantly, the inherent inefficiency and costs related to trying to triage problems and restore service availability across potentially dozens of different tools. Once you can relate back to the actual service delivery aspects and build out the understanding of the real impact and complexity of using those different tools, it becomes much easier to start arguing or building a case for adopting a unified monitoring platform investigation.
Excellent. Okay, does uptime do capacity modeling or help with planning?
Uptime doesn't do capacity modeling directly. However, it does show you historically the answers to those three questions. So how much capacity do I have? How much am I using? And looking forward, when am I going to run out? Now, that's not necessarily true in-depth capacity modeling where you're able to do mix and match what-if scenarios. But for most environments, those three simple questions and understanding where you're at and where you're going at a basic trend level, that's enough for most organizations.
Good. Here's a simple question. Do we need to install agents?
Uptime provides both agent and agentless options. So we always prefer to use the Uptime agent, which is a lightweight agent that doesn't always run on the system. It only works on a polling basis. The power of that agent allows us to collect very deep metrics from each of the platforms it's installed on, as well as trigger self-healing capabilities. Now, we also have agentless options, so of course WMI, different APIs, and VMware virtualization technologies, SNMP protocols. So if you aren't comfortable with agents in your environment, there are a number of different options out there for you.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm going to combine two questions. I think they go well together. Mm-hmm. What is the latest version of Uptime? And are there any significant improvements, or what are the significant improvements from version 7 to the latest version?
Oh, absolutely. The latest version is Uptime 7.1, and some of the key capabilities that we introduced for that version would include massive enhancements in performance and scalability, adopting a 64-bit core architecture to make sure that your monitoring solution can scale with the ramp up in size of your environment. We also launched an integration API, which makes it much easier to integrate Uptime with any other tools in your environment, or use Uptime information in any customized way that you may find that you need it.
Cool. Can you get a business service tree view?
You can at a basic level, right? So certainly you can define business services, right, and all the components that make up those services. Within that, you can identify which components of that service are essential to the availability and performance of that business service, and then also a number of different metrics or checks that are just points of interest, right? So, for example, a file system capacity monitor may not bring down your entire application if the file system is getting close to full, but you certainly want to get a heads up on that. Once you've defined your initial business service, you can actually do a collection of business services, so being able to say that different services in and of themselves or are a part of a master or parent service, so that capability is there.
Very good. Here's a good question. I'm already an Uptime customer. I want to know what needs to be opened up within my network to be able to do uptime mobile, so I can see my uptime dashboard on my cell as well as outside of the domain.
Sure, that's probably a little bit deep for this conversation. We do have help articles online that describe all the network security permissions provided for that. But really, what it will come down to is, depending on the specifics of your own environment, there will need to be network access available that will bridge the cellular to kind of uptime networks. And we do have a number of different documents and examples online to describe how to do that.
Very good. I'm gonna combine two questions again. How can I get simple availability and reachability reports, and how to get dashboards, business service views?
Well, sure. The process is relatively straightforward. So once installing Uptime or a tool like it, what will generally happen is that Uptime will go out and probe your entire environment, so do an auto-discovery on it to identify everything that is responding in the environment. Now, once we've done that inventory and collection and understand what your environment looks like, we will immediately basically start polling each of those individual systems to validate their availability. Once that process is ongoing, it's very, very simple to come into Uptime and run our collection of different reports. We have over 30 reports that can be scheduled or sent ad hoc in PDF format. And there's probably 7 or 8 different reports there that will take 3 different click 1, 2, 3, and you'll get a nice high-level report summarizing the availability in your environment.
Thank you, David. This has been great, but it looks like we are both out of questions and out of time. Thanks again to our presenter, David Leith, and to all of our listeners for attending today's webinar, Guidelines for Unified IT, Better Visibility of IT Across Physical and Virtual Platforms. On behalf of Uptime Software and Ziff Davis, thanks for your time and have a great day.